This is a recorded training for agency billing. What I wanted to do is first look at a test client called Blue 03. And for those of you in billing, you won't be dealing with a lot of this, but I wanted you to understand where some of the information comes from. We have a client who's been received into your agency, usually sent over with an authorization for a number of services. And someone in your agency is going to be receiving that client in their referral, and at the same time will be accepting the authorization. So right here under the client we have that authorization, and we can see the services that are on it. We can see that this client came from IDJC and that 3 different services were authorized: an assessment, outpatient, and drug and alcohol testing. This particular screen also allows you to keep track of how much I have left on my authorization. I can see the initial amount that was authorized, and I can see anything that was encumbered. Encumbered means that we have created an encounter that we've released to billing, so we've created a claim item, but the claim item hasn't yet been paid. So we'll look back at this authorization once we go ahead and process some of these items and see how this changes. But we can see exactly what's been used here and what we have left. The other important thing here is that every client also has what we call a client group enrollment. This is the equivalent of taking their insurance card and understanding who's paying for their treatment services. In this particular situation, we have a cost share on this, where the client had a fee determination showing that they're responsible for 50% of the cost of the treatment that is going to be paid for through this particular funding source. Clients can have multiple payers. They could have a self-pay plan. They might have another type of benefit plan. Well, certainly some of them have Medicaid. This one in particular just has IDJC funding right now. As your clinicians work through treatment, they're going to create what we call encounters for the client. And an encounter is simply a recording of a service that's rendered. In this particular situation, we're going to look at this one, which is an assessment service that was created. If you remember, that was on the authorization, and it's not been released to the billing department yet. That means that in this case, this service is still read-only. They're picking a service, they're not having to code it, but they are recording the date and the time, the duration of the service, as well as who did it and the diagnosis for that particular service. And then this screen, which is something that only the clinicians have access to, gives a lot of information about the clinical side of things. So associating it to goals and objectives from the treatment plan, as well as indicating progress notes and signing them. When we release the encounter to billing, when the clinician does this, it will actually tie it to the client's funding source as long as this particular service has actually been authorized, and as long as we're providing it within the period of that authorization. So we can see that that one was released to billing. It now becomes read-only. What this means is that anything that's been released to billing has been tossed over basically to our billing department, and that's where many of you that are listening come in. So most of your time is going to be spent here under agency and under billing. We're going to look at these items because what happens when we release something to billing is that we create a claim item. Claim items come through WITS in what we call a released status. So here are 2 claim items. One is the service that I just created on the 30th today, and there's a claim item here that was created on the 24th as well. Note that we can go to these claim items and we can, right from here, we can see the charge, we can see the duration, we can see the particular procedure code that was associated with the service that was rendered. If I want to go look at the detail of that particular service, I can do this. Note that the billable units are automatically created for me based on the duration of the service. That's all set up separately and maintained by the Department of Health and Welfare. Now I can either, if I decide that I needed to step this claim backwards for some reason, I needed to reject it out to the clinician again, I can do that simply by clicking on reject. And I can give a reason here, and the clinician will actually see this particular encounter highlighted in red on the client's information. That will give them the ability to modify or change any information. They'll see your note as a way that they can read and understand what you're asking them to change. And then that also makes that encounter editable again so that it can be resubmitted to you one more time. However, if we go through and look at any of our claim items that are in a release status and we feel comfortable with those claim items in that particular status, we can go ahead and actually batch them. One of the things I do want to point out before I create a batch here is that on this screen I have the ability to use any combination of these fields up here as a search. You're going to see that at the top of a lot of the screens that we're going to look at. And remember, this is not just a way to process claim items and submit them for payment. It's also a way to review and monitor things. If we want to find claim items that were created by a particular facility, we can look at only those that were created in one particular facility just by adding that filter to this particular screen. We can look for a specific plan. If you wanted to review any information that was out there for IDJC and not for any other payers, you could do that by selecting one of the plans. We also have the ability to search for any services that were done for a particular client by entering the client last name or first name. We can look for services done by a particular staff member. I can also look for a date range. If I want to look for all services that are out there that were rendered in the month of September, I can simply enter the beginning of my range. I put a colon, and then I put the end of my range. And this gives me the ability to search on a date range of services. So we can see that I have 3 claim items that were created that are released in the month of September for clients in my agency. Now, the step that happens next is once we're comfortable with every claim that's in a released status, we can create a claim batch. Claim batches are by payer. So if you have Medicaid items, they're going to get batched separately from your ATR items than they are from any of the other funding sources that you deal with. But just know that any claim that's in a release status will get batched when I create a batch, when I indicate the funding sources that I want to work with. Before I do that, I also want to indicate to you a couple other items on this screen. We have an export. In many cases, I talked about the search here. You're going to see searches that you can do to find information that you're looking for. Once you find it and populate a list, you'll find that the export here gives you everything on the list in an Excel view so that you can take that data and do something else with it if you'd like to do something else with it. Also, any screen that we have where we have a list, you'll notice that the column headers are sortable. I have a hand, and that means that I can sort any column simply by clicking on that particular underlined item. So that can be helpful in terms of organizing any data that you're trying to look at. Let's go ahead and create a batch. Again, it's going to ask me what funding sources I want to create those batches for. And it will create separate batches for each of those plans, because obviously each one of them can have a different method that we end up billing. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my claim batch list screen. And in WITS, the batches that we put through are going to come through in a release status as well. Now we can search for batches that were created today simply by typing in the date. It does take a minute for those to be created. And in this case, we can see that there's a batch processing error that we may need to deal with. We'll click on the profile and we'll find that there's something that needs to be set up here. And we can simply take care of this one time by going to our agency's payer plan for the state training plan and set that up. This is something that most likely will be set up for you, but just in case you get an error, you'll know how to deal with this. I'm going to go to this particular plan. And I'm going to go to my agency profile, and I'm going to enter my employer identification number as well as my Social Security number. All fake data, of course. If I go back to my claim batch list now, and I look for batches that were created today, I'm going to find the one that I just updated, and we'll see that there is a batch processing error. If I go to the profile again, down at the bottom of this screen, I can reprocess the batch. We'll give that a minute to compute. Now, if we go back to our batch that we've reprocessed, one of the things that we will note is that once we reprocess this, we have the ability to bill it. Once it's billed, that means it's been sent over to our payer, and it is something that we have now just billed the payer group. We've gone ahead and processed that and sent it over. Note also, anytime I want to, I can look at my claim items for a particular batch. In this case, you can see that I have on this billed batch of claims here, I can see all of the claim items that were included in that particular batch that have been submitted to my payer. So here we have a list of all of the batches that are appropriate for this particular, or all of the claim items that are appropriate to this particular batch that we created today. We can see the total amount of that charge, and we can see all of the claim items that were included in that. So very quickly, if I go over to the contractor now, I will be able to see in the contractor agency that they will be able to go ahead and accept those claim items from me and process them. They have a screen where they look at submissions, and I'm going to look at submissions sent by the agency that I was just working in. Again, this is something where the provider or the payer agency is going to be reviewing information that comes over to be adjudicated. And they are able to adjudicate those claims and process them through and pay them right from these particular screens. If we go back to the provider agency at this point, the provider agency, we talked about the client and looking at this particular client and their authorization. And what you're going to find now is that there are more services that have been encumbered because of those services that we went ahead and created today and released to billing. Once those are paid by the actual provider agency, we will have the ability to see those then expended. As a billing person, I like to point out some of the screens, again, you're going to come in and be able to look at the claim items that have been submitted. You're going to create batches, and you're going to bill a batch. But there's a couple other screens under here that are very helpful in terms of keeping track of what is coming and going from your agency. The authorization list screen can be very helpful for any authorizations that you have out there for any clients. If I want to look at only the active authorizations and see where those stand, I can see the agency that sent those over. I can see the client information. I can see where we stand. And again, remember, we're looking at encumbered funds as well as available funds for any of those particular account or authorizations. So I can see how much has been authorized to me, what's been encumbered, and this means that I have this money that we've released to billing, but we haven't been paid for yet from this particular agency. So that's a very helpful way to keep track of anything that's been authorized. Another very helpful thing is if you're in charge of keeping track of your clinicians, this is something that some of you may be given a role to have access to. Obviously, if a clinician creates an encounter but never releases it to billing, we don't create any claim items. So if we would like to see, check on any unreleased encounters, we have the ability to see unreleased encounters from here. If you need to go follow up with a clinician, or maybe you have a clinical supervisor in your agency that does that, they can use this screen as a way to do that. I can sort by rendering staff and see who's not releasing things to billing. I mentioned to you that if you reject a claim, that it will go back and be editable by the particular person that created the claim. And they will see this on the client side. You can also see it from the billing side, and you can see the reason that was entered for rejection. So that's the same thing that the clinicians would see. Another thing that's very helpful to see here is our payment list. One of the things that we have the ability to do is to accept payments from outside payers or from a client. If a client needs to pay for something, I'm going to add a payment from them by clicking on Add Client Payment. There is also a client payment screen that can be added where your clinicians can have access to it. They would have the ability to accept a payment from a client, but they don't have the ability to apply it to a particular service that was rendered. You're the only ones that can do that. The other thing that this screen shows us is anything that has been paid by our contractors. So if some of those things that we have submitted have been in fact paid, we have the ability to come here and see any payments from a particular contractor. In this case, I don't believe we have any, but we'll come back in a little bit and look for some after we process a few behind the scenes. If I want to add a client payment, it allows me to see the clients, find a client, and in this case, maybe I want to find that client that we've been working with. Note that I could have searched for that client as well. In this case, it allows me, for instance, if I want to find the clients with the first name of Blue and the last name of 03, I can find that client. Or I can add a client payment. Search for the client. He didn't show up on the last screen because he hasn't made a payment to us. Now when I search for him here, I can find him and I could select him and I can add a payment. So let's just say that he paid us $20 and we want to apply that payment. First we save it and then we apply. And what this is a list of the encounters that we might apply that payment to. I'd like to apply this particular payment to something that happened today. I can check that one and select it, indicate that that is going to be paid for this type of client. Client has a balance on this particular encounter of $54.40. So that that client has made a payment. And now you'll see that when I search for this particular client, we have recorded that we received a payment of $20. We can choose to not apply the payment as well. If your clinician using the payment screen that appears under the client, then they will not apply it, find unapplied payments. For instance, and we want to look for any unapplied payment of greater than 0. We could search here for any unapplied, and you could go then and apply those as you see fit. So in this paid $1,000, and we probably want to go apply that to a bunch of different encounters entered. Our contractor agency has actually processed our payment. We can come back into the payment list by clicking on Go for payments we've received. We can see that they have paid us $15,000.06. Obviously, in the normal process of things, you might want to look for payments that were received within a particular, so maybe a posted date of a month. You may also want to look at this particular contractor to see when they've paid you. Again, remember that you can use any of these screens, the search criteria, to help you narrow down what you're looking for. In this case, I can see that because this went through the internal payment process in WITS, that all of this money has already been applied. And if I want to look at how it was applied, it's going to show me a list of the transactions and how things were paid. So in this case, I have a lot of old claim items. Some of them were but in this, see an amount paid. I can see things that were not paid for a certain reason. I can see what was applied for any of this, and this will be all of that money that was paid to me applied to the various claim items that were submitted by my clinicians. One of the is once I've received payment from any of my payer sources, also can find out what my client balances are. So there's another to help us with that, and it'll show us a client balance. If we want to look at any clients who have a balance greater than 0, we can search for clients who have a balance greater than 0. So in this case, I can see those clients and their balances, and I can for them. So this just gives me a list of any client out there balance. And if I wanted to create statements, I can simply check off those that I need the statements for, and I click on Create Statements. It asks me in range. Normally you'd be doing this maybe for a month, but if you have a good interest for determining when you want to kind of get speed with your clients that are coming in and what they owe you, this is a great way to do that. You can print out these for any time period and any time. I'm going to click Go, and it's going to pop 3 new printable windows. And so this is going to show me, for this particular client, it's giving me 01, and if red actually had I would see that, and I can print this, show not only does he owe me $343, but for what? What dates of service does that include? He can see what, if anybody had paid anything, there would be an amount here from a payer that had been credited, and so he can see his balance. If I wanted to print out a different one, okay, one here. For blue, and you'll notice it reads criteria for the date. So once again, here's one where we have that came in. So we have a service date for outpatient services, and we can see that the charge $2.20, and we can also see paid by the managed service contractor. So on 9/30 we received, and so that basically lowers this particular client's amount that was paid by an outside entity or an outside payer. So again, just like we would receive from our doctor's office, it's a statement that shows exactly the services that were rendered and any payments that have by a third party processed through WITS. And again, if it's processed through WITS, it automatically puts it directly against the exact claim items that were submitted. So when you run, you can show them what the state paid and what they're responsible for paying. Just remember that any of the screens in here can be useful for actually looking at as well as doing your transactional processing. For those of you that are working with the Supreme Court, I wanted to a different way that the courts have of some of the majority of the funding that they're giving patient and intensive outpatient services. What we've just reviewed is a fee-for-service world, billing for things that you've actually done. What the courts are doing is a flat rate where you're receiving a rate to compensate you for an expected, it's more like a capitated, we like to call it cost reimbursement or invoicing. So for those of you that are, you're focused a little bit on this invoicing item right here. And you're going to find that this follows much the same process as the claim items. One thing I do want to point out to you is two different types of claim items here. You'll see that one is called fee-for-service. Those are the ones that we've just talked through. We also have what we call fee-for-service equivalent claim items that are created behind the scenes when you're doing an invoicing type of situation. Not being paid for these, but we are creating these claim items because this will give you the ability to go back to the courts, or the courts the ability to come to you and say, what would I have paid you on a basis if we were paying you fee-for-service for the work you've done? So your clinicians are going through the same exact process with the court clients. They're creating encounters, they're releasing them to billing. The advantage is that all of these claim items that they're creating get automatically batched and billed behind the scenes so that you don't have to worry about it. But you have them there so you can see all the work that you've done, again, for the Supreme Court as these fee-for-service equivalent claim items behind the scenes. What you're going to be doing to get paid, though, focuses in tab here. In your contract with the courts, we have what we call a tier, and this is simply a grouping of the money plus the population that you're serving. It's going to be one population that you're serving, just like you just saw that I did. If I are invoices that have already been created, where they stand, you can created invoices for the month of January of 2013, February. Invoices are done on a monthly basis, and I can see where, in this case, I can see that I billed the courts for $4,000 and they have paid it. So if I want to look at my paid invoice, I have the ability to pop up a report here that just shows me what I billed. This one is accepted. They've accepted it, but they've not yet paid it. This one is waiting for them to review it. I have billed it. Look at this one. Actually entered my money for this particular, but I haven't sent it over to the Supreme Court for them. In this case, it's still, we can see in here what's been paid. Remember, there's only been one invoice paid, even though this is our March. They haven't paid our February one yet. I can see what's been paid to date for this period, which is typically a fiscal year, and I can also see what my amount is versus my budget amount. This gives me a feel for my overall budget for the year. So in this case, this invoice just so you can see what it looks like to create one. Since I haven't billed it yet, the system will allow me to do that. So what I want to select my tier, and I want to add a new invoice. The first thing I'll note is the month and year, and it tells me funding I'm talking about. I'm going to go ahead and save. And I know it's saved because it gives me a status. But notice I haven't added any money to this invoice yet. Is I want to bill for the amount that I'm allowed to bill. In this case, it's telling me what my current month's budget is. And depending on the rules set by the court, you may be able to or that amount exactly. In this case, I'm going to bill for just under that. I'm going to add to the line item of salaries, I'm going to add $29.60. You'll notice that my budget or item was updated here. In addition, I'm going to look at my utilities, and I'm going to edit my utilities line item. And I'm going to go ahead and bill the $800. Now my total has been updated, and I'm effectively billing the courts for $60 for this particular month. If I feel that that's what I'm to be billing for and I'm finished, all I have to do is click Bill It. And had they already paid the other invoice, I would be able to bill it, and this would become read-only. We can show you real quickly what that would go over to the court agency, and we see what it looks like from their perspective. They have, just as if they were paying claims, an invoice submission, not a claim submission list. We're going to look for claims coming from the state training agency, and we can see that here's it's already been adjudicated. The March one, because we haven't billed it yet. The February one that they've already accepted. And in our case, now they have the ability to finalize this, which means basically that they will have the ability to consider it paid to you. Obviously, somebody is going to be going in and printing off that invoice and sending you a check, but this now shows me that I have this invoice. The status of my invoice we'll be able to see from your side. We can see that it's adjudicated from the court side. If we go back to the provider agency, we can see it's going to be adjudicated as well. So once again, I'm back. I'm going to billing, and I'm going to go to invoicing for the invoices in that particular tier. We have 2 paid invoices. The one that we just created for March, we will now be able to bill the invoice. The invoice is billed, and you'll note I don't have it anymore because I've now, just like the claim items that we submitted before were read-only, now this is now read-only for me because I've put the contractor agency to consider it for payment. Again, on that invoice screen, I have to look at any of the invoices I've created over time. I can use the search criteria to go and view those and see what's there and what's been paid and what's still in a billed status. So once again, I encourage everybody to not only use these screens as a method for processing your transactions, the method to get information out of the system to see and at any given time in terms of who's paid you what. If you want to look at invoices, this is the one screen that you're going to look at for Supreme Court invoices. Looking at your payments or EOB transactions for